Hello everyone. In the previous videos, we actually started off with learning React JS. We saw what are class components, what are functional components. We saw lifecycle hooks. We also saw two different types of functional hooks: use state and use effect. Today, the topic that we are actually going to cover is React state management with use reducers and context. This is not Redux state management. That is a different thing. I'll come up with a separate video on that topic also after this. Today, let's try to understand that when the Redux was becoming extremely popular, how React came up with different concepts of hooks for functional components as use reducers and use context and tried to do the state management concept. Earlier, we saw use state was one hook that which helped us in saving the state and then changing it and then re-rendering the functional component. So today, let's start off with what use reducer is. Use reducers tells us that whenever there is any state and any dispatch action or method is being called, it will change the old state to a new state. The main the main point that we actually need to remember is that it is immutable, meaning the old state is actually not same as the new state. Both are two different objects. So it saves the old state object also is being saved, a new state object is also being saved, a new object is getting created while uh, this runs. The other point that is it is pure function. You can say use reducers is a pure function. Why? Because if you send the same input, it will always give you the same output. That's what use reducer is used for. For each component, the number of components that we have, the number of components for which we use reducer. So you would definitely associate with each component a reducer. You will have, say, if you have a component, say, if you're using a component A, then you will have reducer 1. You will have a dispatch function, say 1. You will associate an action with it, action 1. You will save the state with it, so state 1 say, and there will be a variable associated with the states. There will be a JSON object or a simple string object, a string variable that we will be storing count as integer. That's what we are doing it here. Now, if there is a separate component, say component B, if somebody comes up with a different component, then we will introduce a new reducer with it. We will introduce a new dispatch method with it, not the first one. We have to do the same thing again, action 2, and we again have to introduce a new state, say a different state for it. So use reducer, what it helps us? It only helps us in creation of all these things locally. For this is for component A, and this one is for component B. You cannot access action 2 from component A. So what is the next point? That whenever you use reducer hook in functional component, it always co-locates the container for the component for which you are writing use reducer. So how can we ask the components to move? Say if we want to use action 2 and if we want to invoke this action 2 from component A, how will you do it? That's where this use context comes into play. It helps you in assigning the contexts you can assign. We always know that React is unidirectional flow, right? The data flow always is unidirectional. It from the parent, the data flows to the child components. It's not like Angular that it will have a bidirectional flow. It's unidirectional. So whenever, say, if there are multiple components, A is a parent component of B is a parent component of C is a parent component of D, and so on, whatever it is, and so on, whatever it is. If you say, if somebody is assigning that in the B component, let's assign a context to it. The context is says anything. Say the theme is dark, the background, foreground picture should be dark. Then it will get assigned for all the states, C also, D also. If somebody, for our own example, if somebody assigns that in component A, the count value should be, say, 8, then the same value will flow to B, C, and D, unless, of course, anybody changes it. That's a different part that we will see. So, what it says that when you use context, you make the state global, definitely with unidirectional flow, not with bidirectional flow, that is from parent to child. That's the simple thing that is there. So you're making it global. If you are having it in the HOC, the highest order component, this is a very common vocabulary for React, where we say that the first component, say what we say is say the app.js. If that is the first component, we can name it as HOC. We can say that that is the HOC component from where we will have all the child components. From the HOC it will be there. So HOC will understand where exactly we have to render which component in this single page application. So if you assign a context to the HOC, then that becomes global, right? So somewhere they told us that okay, you don't need to pass props one by one. Say earlier in the ancient JavaScript way, what it was, say if something is defined in B and if D requires it, you will always need to have one-to-one communication. How? You need to pass the props from A to B, B to C, A to D, C to B, C to A to D, something like that. Meaning all the props need to be passed from. So they came up with a different concept that we will do a state management globally. Nobody has to pass the states from one place to other using the props. Instead, we will have a store, global store. That's what Redux came in from that point of view. But still, there are disadvantages of, meaning there are a few challenges using the React state management. That's why people need to transition to the Redux state management. We will cover that part later. Let's. So this is what the theory is all about. Now let's go on to some coding part, and then we will at the end maybe see what are the drawbacks, meaning what are the exact challenges that you have, and why exactly you need Redux. That's where we will end the video for today. And tomorrow, or maybe like in the next video, whenever I make it, I'll come up with a separate video on how we can do the Redux state management. So let's go to our code base. I have created a very simple function class as we have been doing. I've just named it as reducer component, and everything is the same. So how shall we define? So we need to pass state and the dispatch method, which will be invoked, and the hook that we need to actually create is a reducer. What do we need to pass in this use reducer? We need to tell them that we need to give them a method, a reducer method. So let's name it as count reducer. And we also need to tell them that what is the initial state. We always need to give them that, the initial state. So let's define what the initial state would be. Say initial state would be, we can say count as 7. Okay. And let's say initially we are defining this as 0. Const count equal to 0, and then we are changing this to initial state. we need to define this method. What exactly will be performed when dispatch is getting called? So let's create a separate function for it. We cannot keep it default. We'll have to keep it namespace only. A function discount reducer, that is a method. You can do it in the ancient way. You can also create arrow function, whatever. Say what exactly we need to pass? State. And what will the second component be? The action. From where? So we have to write something here. What do we write? Earlier we used to write that what it will call. So button dot on click. Say if anything is getting passed, we are actually going to dispatch. We are going to dispatch what? And we will say there that type will be, say, some string value. Increase we are doing. Let's keep it increase only. Okay. Let's keep it increase. You have increased the count. Let's what exactly will we write it here? The count to state.count. We have to write that. Okay. Now, what exactly work will be done? We always need to note that action will have sub type as payload. We'll see that later. The first one is the type. What action will be performed based on the type? So we can let's have one switch case. Can have if else block. So action dot type. Whenever the case is say increase, we have to do some perform some task. We need to return what? Let's return the count, and we need to return state the count whatever it is plus one will do. And we can keep this decrease also, but let's just have default for now. We will be throwing that no, sorry, it has errored out. Something that we can do. So let's understand that we have used a state. We are dispatching it from the button on click. Whenever there is a type increase, if there is another button, the same thing. Let's write it. Let's understand. If there is another button, say the other button is decrease. Let's decrease one, and this also let's keep it as decrease. So we need to introduce one more switch case here, decrease, and we need to decrement the count by one. That's what we are going to do. So when we have to dispatch action, there are two different actions, say three different actions. One is error. If somebody passes a type, say not increase or decrease, but something else, then it will go to the error part. So whenever this is again the array restructuring concept that we had seen earlier. I'll not go into that. You can refer my previous videos for that. Use reducer will in the state the initial count will be set, and in the dispatch the action will be performed based on the count reducer, the method, the function that you will write. And we have defined our function here. So let's go to our Chrome now and see what exactly has run. So see, there are two different buttons, increase and decrease. The initial count is 7, which we have done, and we are increasing it 8. Let's decrease it. Okay. There is some error. Beautiful. Uncaught. Count reducer has not been defined. Perfect. So let's go back to our code base now. We have missed doing a major task. We have not defined the count reducer for decrease. We have defined it, but we have misspelled it. That's our problem. Okay, let's go to our Chrome again. See, increasing it 8, 9, 10, decreasing it 9. Perfect. So this is a very simple example how we write use reducer. We can save the state using this way. Say if somebody says that they don't want to separately initialize the state in initial state, they don't want to store it, then how will you do in this initial state? you will instead of writing this, let's say the count directly. We are going to say, let's say the count will be directly 9. So we have to remove this part, we have to remove this part, we don't need it anymore. So directly you can also do it. Let's see if it works. We're not kept it anything. Okay, let's keep 2 for today. Let's go to our room. Okay, you are increasing it, perfect. You are decreasing. So that also works perfectly. Now, say somebody wants to say that I don't want to initialize the count immediately as and when you are going to. So let's go to our code base. Now, say somebody says that they don't want to initialize the count immediately. Here we are directly assigning the count. Somebody says that no, we will define when we exactly want to initialize it. So for that, we actually need to write a new method. So let's maybe change this. Somebody said this we don't need. We will invoke a method init. Init method we need to invoke. Perfect. Okay, let's invoke it. So function init. What this init function will do? It will take one initial count and then it will assign return what that the state variable and then the initial count will be assigned to it. That's the task for init. And how init will actually work? So it needs an initial count. Where shall we define this initial count? Let's define it just before it, just in this class. A functional component itself. Once say initial count will be say 40, and let's change it to 3. Even if it's 40, we will understand it. Okay. So let's go to our Chrome again. Okay, there is some issue. Let's see. Let's try to not a number. NaN is not a number. We can see the reducer here in the hook. Count is NaN. There's no error in here. Initial count is assigned a value, but never used. No used was. What exactly is our error? Can somebody say? We have forgotten. Uh, let's go back to our code base now. We have forgotten to actually pass initial count here in our useReducer. If we don't pass it, how is it going to have it? That's the actual cause for it. So now let's go to our Chrome again. Okay, it's there. So you're increasing it, you are decreasing it. So it is working fine. So let's try to understand our code base again. What we have exactly done in this, we have said that we don't want to initialize the count immediately. We want to initialize it, invoke this method, keep it outside the reducer. I don't want to have it inside the reducer. I want to have it outside the reducer. Do a lazy initialization of init whenever it is required. If not required, never do it. This is another way of using useReducers. That's all for this. And you can always go ahead and maybe change all these methods, whatever we have written. You can change it to functional arrow functions. If you want me to change it, how it will look as is, it will whatever you pass, it will always write it in this way. Whatever you are going to pass, there's an arrow, and then the action will be performed as this. And this is not something that you would need a different method. The switch case till here, and we don't require this anymore. I'm sorry, this is already the state and function that we have done. we will write it in this way: const header equal to whatever is being passed, and this will not be a function because this is a arrow function. Const reducer. You can also change this to an arrow function. How will you change it? You can write it in the same way. Init, whenever init is getting called, that's how we write it. You can always go ahead and change everything, whatever you want to. Let's see whether it works or if some error has come up. Uh, okay, it works. If there are errors, we always learn. That's why looking forward to error is also a good way of learning. And now this is all about the use reducer concept. Now let's go and see how we can write use context. What exactly do we write? We can do it here or we can do it in a separate one. Let's do it here only. How do you write use context? Let's define something here. My context. The value that you want to give is, say, how it gets created. You need to create context. How, what are you going to create? Say the color will be red. I'm just keeping string. Let's keep it simple. I'm just trying to tell you how exactly we work with it. And then whenever, say, the first react.create context, you will always write it in the parent class or in the parent function component, wherever you are thinking that it should be globalized, meaning in the HOC or wherever you want to. Meaning whichever is the highest top level requirement for you, you do it. And the second one, use context, that is you are just using it in the read fashion, you're not changing it, you reading it. The change is possible, that I'll say how it is. You are using the same my context. That's how you write it. And say if somebody wants to print it, the dollar value, let's use our use effect. The life cycle after the component has been rendered, it will call a method. Let's write as console.log. And what do we write? String, whatever you gave the string as, is dollar value. And use effect is a parameter, sorry, method. And let's write it in the lambda way only, uh, because this is, let's change this, take it to one level ahead. Okay, there's a problem. Ah, okay. So it's saying that use effect and then return is not working in the same line. Some error has happened. Let's try to understand what the problem has happened. We have used use effect. Ah, okay. We have forgotten to give one bracket. Now let's go to our Chrome again. There is some error that has turned up here. Okay. Use context has not been defined. This has not been defined. So why would they not take it? This should have been taken. I don't know why. Sometimes this these kind of errors always come up. This should have been taken, but the name is pasted away. Sorry, you are increasing it. You can see the string dot value. Okay, we have not used the backtick, so let's go ahead and change the backtick. Backtick or colon, but the bracket should always be right. Okay, so let's go to our Chrome again. Increase it. See, we can see string red. Again, increase it. So it's getting written the number of times you are actually increasing the count. Decrease it. So whenever the component is did update, did will unmount, we had seen this. That will always call the life cycle hook of use effect for the functional component. So that's why we are seeing. So that is what we were thinking. We were thinking to study today. We have seen the use reduces and use context. Now let's come back and see what exactly is the problem that we spoke. That use reducers is able to help us in storing the state for one specific component. Use context is able to help us, say class component A is having saving the context, then B will also get it. And if C is the child, C as child will also get the context and will read it. That's how state management is flowing from top to bottom, unidirectional flow in React. But think of a few problems now. What problems you can say? Say if we have the dispatch method, the dispatch method will be there. One dispatch method is associated with one action. Can we associate, say, class A's dispatch method with class B's action? Can we do that? No, right? That is where Redux actually helps us. It helps us in having a global, a unified one dispatch, and you can associate any number of actions to it. So that's one limitation to Redux, to sorry, React state management, and where Redux solves the problem. How does it solve the problem? It has a global store. That's the concept for it. So it will have a global reducer. You can have a global dispatch, and you can associate n number of actions to any reducer to any dispatch, call it across the application, as if it means that there is one-to-one communication in between all the components. But how are they achieving it? They are achieving it using the Redux way. uh, Global store container. That's what that's where Redux comes into play. And the next topic for the next video will be Redux state management. I'll come up with a separate video on that. So till then, we keep learning from reactjs.org site. So that's it. Thank you. Happy learning.